I suspect that we are going to be close to the $18 trillion mark in the next 1.5 decades. And to do that, we don't require any great sophisticated economic thinking or any great policy gymnastics or political machinations. We are doing small things right. In India, we have promoted the idea of something called the digital public infrastructure, which means that we have highways that belong to the publics, and any business can create value running on those highways. If 5 years ago I told you that every fourth or fifth iPhone is going to be an Indian iPhone, you would have laughed at me, right? But that's happening in less than half a decade.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the East-West Center in Washington. For those of you who do not know, the East-West Center in Washington was established in 1960 by the United States Congress to promote education, study, and exchange between the United States and Asia. So we've been very active. Our main campus is in Honolulu, Hawaii, and of course we have our program based here at the East-West Center in Washington. Absolutely delighted today to have with us Dr. Samir Saran, who many of you know by reputation. He holds so many important posts in India and, in fact, globally that I'm always would take a whole seminar to describe all his expertise and experience. But I'll flag a couple of things, and one in particular, and that is he has just joined the board of the East-West Center as the newest member of the board of directors. So thank you for doing that. And his main role when he's not serving on our board is as president of the Observer Research Foundation. As you know, he's also been recently appointed by the government of India as chair of T20, secretariat for the G20, which will be responsible for the events, publications, communiques, and activities of the upcoming G20. So this is just a couple of his roles, but he has, of course, deep expertise on issues of global governance, cybersecurity, the digital commons, etc. So you know his full biography, so I won't spend a lot of time because I'd really like to get to approximately 40 minutes of discussion with Dr. Saran on his views about India and the world. And I have to tell you, I failed on something, which was the title of this book. I was joking with him earlier that this really should have been called India, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Because it really does feel, in fact, like India is everything, everywhere, all at once. Not, as you all know, the state visit here in Washington, the subsequent visit by Prime Minister to France, the SEO convening, the upcoming G20, and it's just a part of India's incredibly active global engagement. So it's a great time to talk about India and its role in the world, and I can't think of a better person to have than Dr. Samir Saran. So welcome and thank you for doing this. We're just going to have a conversation, and then I want to open it up in the last 20 minutes or so for you to ask questions of Dr. Saran and make any comments. I'll ask you at that point to identify yourself and your affiliation, and then we'll go from there. We have a pretty tight 60 minutes because of Dr. Saran's schedule. So welcome. Let me start with something that is, when we think about India in the world, we think about all the things it's doing. But one of the things that is perhaps less clear to American audiences in particular is you have the most popular democratic elected leader in the world, Prime Minister Modi. You have this active engagement. But what does Prime Minister Modi and his government tell the people of India about its role in the world and why his government is playing this active role? And what should others know about the domestic compulsion requirements of India before this active role?
So thank you, Satul, for having me, and I'm delighted to join the board, both with you and further the mission and the mandate of a very prestigious institution, which I think also has to now navigate the new geographies and new politics of the 21st century.
Indeed.
So it's exciting times ahead, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. Any political leader would tell you that there are limited gains on successes around foreign policy for electoral politics. That's true for the US, that's true for India as well. And there has to be a clear relationship between what you do with the world and the domestic outcomes that they serve. And only then do people buy into this whole process of having an active outgoing, engaging foreign policy. So there have to be clear deliverables, or at least there should be a roadmap that should be visible to most. That we are seeking to do X, Y, and Z through these multiple engagements that we have invested in. So let me first start with your title that never was: India, everything, everywhere, all at once. Look, this is a good description of India today, and I think there are two reasons for why this is a good description. We are in that beautiful 15 years arc of a nation's journey, which happens to all nations, by the way. All nations who become large and influential go through a decade and a half of transitions. Let me give you a more contemporary example. In 2007, China was $3.5 trillion. In 2021, China was close to $18 trillion. In 14 years, it added close to $14 trillion to their GDP. If you look at the years individually, you will find that only in 2 years did they touch the 10% mark. The rest of the years were 6, 7, 5, 4, 2, 8, a mixed bag of performance. It was not the fastest growing time of China's evolution. It was a modest growth period where they added $14 trillion of GDP in 14 years. Now, India today is $3.5 trillion. And so we are 14 years behind China. We started this year at that number. And I suspect that we are going to be close to the $18 trillion mark in the next 1.5 decades. And maybe if not 18, it could be 16, it could be 17, it doesn't matter. We are going to add over $10 trillion in the coming decade and a half to our GDP. And to do that, we don't require any great sophisticated economic thinking or any great policy gymnastics or political machinations. What we require are doing simple things: pipelines for water, road between villages, electricity wires to homes, internet connectivity to handsets. We have to do very basic things. We don't have to enter into a space race or into the genomics race or into live forever race. We did that when we were poor. We should do that in the 50s and 60s and 70s. We were part of the space program and we built up our scientific base and our institutions. Today, because of what we had done in the past, but also because of the determination of the leadership today itself, the contemporary Indian milieu, we are doing small things right. And if we continue to do those small things right, that is basically move our people from $2,000 per capita income to, say, $5,000 per capita income, we start hitting the $10 trillion mark. You move them to $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 per capita income, we are hitting the $15 trillion. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we don't have to give everyone the California dream to become a 15, 16, 17, $18 trillion economy. We have to do the basics right. So if we have to do the basics right, and this kind of growth is in some sense now palpable. We can sense it because we are adding $350 billion to our GDP every year. We are contributing 15% of all global growth to the kitty. You can see it's happening. Finally, the promise is being lived in its early initial stages. So once you are in this period, foreign policy has to serve doing these basic things right. So what does foreign policy need to do? It needs to, for example, ensure that we build partnerships that will allow us to unleash the potential of India's youth in the digital age. So technology partnerships, access to key institutions and decision-making bodies that will shape the regulatory arrangements for the future, partnering with countries and companies that have cutting-edge and leading-edge solutions that will serve the Indian people, creating price points that will serve the bottom of the pyramid, the proverbial next 6 billion that the Atlantic system had forgotten about. So we have to build these partnerships. So our foreign policy is going to be looking at A, how does India grow in the digital age? B, even as we do this, we are mindful and aware and acutely responsible actors in terms of our climate responsibilities. So we know we will have to do this at a time when we don't have the luxury of burning the planet up like the Americans did or the French did or the British did or the Chinese did. The French did. The French used nuclear, although they did in other countries. We shouldn't let them off the hook. But unlike the previous industrial powers, we will not have the luxury of unencumbered growth by ignoring the emissions and carbon footprints and unsustainable practices. So we have to do it in a green manner. Now, once we have to be the first 5 trillion and then the first $10 trillion economy, which will have a green footprint. We today are at 2 tons per capita emissions. No economy before us at $3.5 trillion has been at 2 tons per capita. No one is going to be at 2 tons at 5, unlike India. And no one has been at 2 tons per capita or 3 tons per capita at 10 trillion. Pretty much the trajectory we are, right? So we will be setting the green pathways. No one has done that before. We will be setting the digital pathways for growth. Everyone else has grown in the second or first or third industrial revolution. We will be doing it before. And we will also have to, alongside this, respond to the huge development challenges that we face, the legacy challenges that we face, hunger, livelihoods, the deprivation, health systems, women and gender empowerment, bringing the rest of the country into the economic mainstream that is being left behind. So we also have to respond to the SDG challenges. So tech, digital, and SDGs are the 3 real consequences. And if these are implicated by foreign policy, people respond to foreign policy. So if they see that this is going to be delivered by engaging with the world, by raising money from the world, by bringing technology from the world, by creating partnerships that can unleash our progress on all of these 3 fronts, these are real world offerings which are an outcome of a progressive foreign policy, active foreign policy, a proactive foreign policy, right?
You make a very compelling case of linking the foreign policy question with the domestic drivers, domestic needs, requirements, ambitions. Just pushing on that a little bit, we're entering a system where 30 years of globalization maybe...
Wait, can I give you a quick...
Please.
Look, for example, energy security and India's ability to maneuver in this highly polarized world, and to ensure that we were able to protect our populations from crazy inflation rates and soaring energy prices during the current crisis in Europe is also foreign policy.
Yes.
So people see this, right? That you have a government that was agile, that was quick on its feet, that was able to negotiate with warring factions, with the American government who did not sanction them, with the Russians to be able to access the energy that we required, because we had been crowded out of the Middle East markets. The Middle East markets, which were a normal hunting ground for our energy requirements, now saw European and American buyers. So we were crowded out of that market. We had to find a new source, and we had to be agile, nimble, and innovative to be able to strike new kind of deals, ensure that the transportation of fuel over long distances, because Russia is not easy to move in large quantities. So again, that's foreign policy. So people see that here is someone whose best friend is the US and whose trusted friend is Russia. So now suddenly start thinking about it. Now this is foreign policy, right? Yeah. That you can have your best friend and your trusted friend work for your people, and that is what happened in this recent instance. So I'm sorry, I know in DC some people don't like this, but
No. Whether they like it or not, this is a description of Indian foreign policy coming from you, so it's important to hear. But it's exactly that point. We're entering a period, I think, when that fragmentation, fracturing of opportunity. There's not cohesive globalization. There may be peak globalization, some decoupling, some de-risking. So you might be able to stamp down inflation and keep energy flowing via the Russia connection in this situation, as you said. But on the digital and high-tech side, there's a different constellation of forces developing that are going to pull you away from globalization. How does India plan to manage that in service of its domestic aspirations?
So I think technology is the final frontier in many ways, both in terms of big power competition, both in terms of the future of global integration. Technology obviously intuitively connects us more deeply and in multiple ways, and we've seen the benefits of that interconnectedness, courtesy, hyper digitalization. But now we are beginning to see that digital is also the reason for why we are divided today, both within and across countries, right? So, in this particular case, you will see that a very different set of Indian partnerships begin to surface. So let me give you 2 examples. Now, unlike the California model, where basically the boardrooms own you in the digital domain, or the China model, where the Communist Party owns you in the Chinese digital model, Indians in some other countries have been looking at a third way. In India, we have promoted the idea of something called the digital public infrastructure, which means that we have highways that belong to the publics, and any business can create value running on those highways. They can't own the highways, they can't collect toll on the highways, but they can collect money from the businesses that they produce using those highways, right? So India's payment stack, right? Our payment system, where we account for nearly half of all global digital payments. India is today roughly 46 or 45% of all global digital payments, multiple X of China, 10X or plus of Europe and America. It's huge. And it's been able to do this because you are allowing a Google Pay and a Phone Pay and a Bharat Pay and a Everyone Pay to work on a common undergirding that is owned by the public. It is not owned by any company. So there is no gatekeeping, there is no IPR on the infrastructure, and the best entrepreneurship model wins. And you're competing in the marketplace on a level playing field. So in this, you will see that India partners more with countries like the EU and countries from the EU. So, for example, you would have Vestager in the EU, the commissioner, vice president. She was talking about her pushback against the cowboys in Silicon Valley, right? So she pushed back against the control that they wielded. The Digital Services Act, the various other provisions that the GDPR, for example, was the beginning of that battle with big tech. So you see India more likely to align itself with the EU. So we have a Trade and Technology Council (TTC) with the EU. India has only second geography that the EU has a TTC with. The first is with the US, and the second is with India. You see Japan, you see Norway, you see France, you see a different constellation of actors who also don't want to have to choose between California model and communist model. And we are creating a different set of partnerships to come up with our technology futures. Because like I had mentioned in my first intervention, our future is deeply and intimately linked to the digital. Our growth is going to happen in the digital age. We are not going to factory our way into growth. We will have to be digitally savvy. We'll have to produce digital value. We'll have to create digital supply chains. We'll have to.
Will that produce enough jobs, Samir? I mean, this is one question because of the youth bulge, and it keeps coming up that there's this youth population, and digital can absorb a lot of jobs, but not that many jobs. And in fact, it might narrow the aperture of job growth creation if you don't have some manufacturing. And India's latest data from FT on Indian manufacturing to GDP ratio is actually declining.
So one, I think that's a fair, valid policy question that needs to be responded to. I think there are two parts to this. Will services create enough jobs? That's the first part. Yes, they will.
Okay.
Will they be sufficient? Perhaps not. So I think services done right will build a volume of jobs that we could never imagine. And I'm making this based on two assumptions. One is the servicization of everything. So you're going to see normal manufacturing and process activities becoming digitized and moving to services. So you're going to see a new opportunity on the servification of the old economy that will require a whole new cadre of millions of workers who will be serving the world, because we also have the youth advantage. So the service workforce is not going to be serving just the Indian digital story. It is going to be serving, like we protected you from the Y2K bug. That never happened. So the point I'm trying to make is that we are going to build the digital helmets, the chrome helmets, the digital workforces for the world. So one, yes, we are going to create jobs at scale, and we have to make sure that the way we train our youth, the inputs into building that workforce is thought through. So we will have to create the cadres who will be able to make best opportunities of this changing landscape. But second, manufacturing will not disappear. If you again look at our own Indian story, we do well in manufacturing. We don't do well in bulk manufacturing and mass manufacturing, and we don't we're not as efficient as China is when it comes to cheap labor and cheap raw materials and strict regulatory controls.
Just domestic supply, certainly manufacturing,
Right.
primarily.
Yes, but if you look at certain sectors, the high-end sectors we do well in.
Sure.
So I think that is the second supplement and complement to our service story, that we will have to pick the right sectors and we will have to grow that. So, for example, the Apple story could be a very good template, and it is certainly done extremely well in the last 2 years. And we are now looking at 1 out of every 4 iPhones being produced out of India. Who would have thought that 5 years ago? If 5 years ago I told you that every 4th or 5th iPhone is going to be an Indian iPhone, you would have laughed at it, right? But that's happening in less than half a decade. Now, that's one story. But similarly, from toy manufacturing to electric mobility to batteries to I'm saying this because we have done well in heavy chemicals, and we've done well in petrochemicals, and we've done in refining. India has shown that in auto components and auto parts and pharma, and if you look at the high-end manufacturing or the sophisticated manufacturing segments, India has done fairly well. And if we were to play to those trends and use those trends to be part of the new age industrial landscape that is going to emerge courtesy electrification and batteries, hydrogen and the hydrogen economy, and of course, eventually, as our ambitions must be, the semiconductors and frontier technologies, right? So, I don't think service alone is going to cater to India's needs, but services is going to be a breakthrough sector, especially based on the servification of everything. Everything is going to be a service. In the next couple of decades, manufacturing will be music from the past. Everything will be 3D printing. What is 3D printing? Is it a service or is it manufacturing, right? So we are in that interesting period of transition.
Let me sort of segue into something so India has a everywhere policy in order to meet these aspirations of development, digital technology. Fair enough. In your area of expertise, one of your areas of expertise is global governance. What can we expect for India in global governance front in a time when it is clearly fragmenting and fracturing? Because India seems to have a foot or an arm in all of them. Quad, SCO, UN Permanent Security Council seat, who wants to be on the seat. It's in BRICS. It's convening the Global South. I can see how all of these elevate India's aspirations, both domestically and all the fronts that you've spoken about. It makes sense. But in a sort of competition or contest for global governance, where will India be? On the one hand is this liberal rules-based international order of 45, which I'm not sure exists in the same way or should exist in the same way as it did. And on the other is this very fragmented, bespoke, what I call active design unilateralism. Everything is functional. Minerals, chips, security, alliances. Where can we expect India to be in this spectrum?
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Look, and I say it with all seriousness that we are what? 17% of humanity?
Yeah.
18%. Now, 1/5 of humanity is not going to be kept out of any conversation that is important, valid, and is going to have an impact on the future. And 18% of humanity must make sure it is not out of any room where something is being discussed that will implicate its future.
Sure.
So it is incumbent upon any Indian government to make sure that it is part of the largest spectrum of conversations that take place that have implications for its people. And if India does not do it, it would be negligence. It will amount to gross negligence. You are not safeguarding and protecting and serving the interests of. So that's one philosophical position. On the more specific question, I think there is a wicked question there. Basically, you are asking me that why should I be in the Quad and SCO at the same time? Right? I think that's the point, that we are in a Western.
We're wondering
grouping.
exactly.
We are in a Western group. We are also in a BRICS and a SCO, and I think that was the real question. But look, it's a lot of fun doing that, right? I mean, look, the point I'm trying to say is, if you look at it from a strategic perspective, and I say this to my colleagues from core. Now, look at the advantages of having someone like India in the BRICS or India in the SCO. If you were truly a 1945 rules-based liberal order cardholder, and you had a significant part of the world plotting and scheming in different circles, in different groups, in a different setting, you would want a friend in that room. And to my friends, this is exactly what I say. That our job right now is to be the class monitor in a group that could become very irrational very quickly. I mean, I can tell you from my own, and this is part of public proceedings, but I was in Cape Town a few weeks ago for the academic forum, the BRICS academic forum, because South Africa is the chair this year, so I had spent time there. Now, I can tell you for sure that there were only two voices in the room that said that before you start jumping onto the BRICS currency bandwagon or BRICS expansion bandwagon, is there any research? Is there any paper? Is there any study? Is there any cost benefit analysis that has been done? Is there anyone who has tried to understand the implications of any of these? And there were only two people in the room who said it's the Brazilian and the Indians, right? So my point here is that in each of these groupings, it is always useful to have a country or actor who has a skill in the global game. India is not looking to play regions. India's energy requirements, food security aspects, minerals, hunger, and trade footprint compels India to be a global actor. We are not going to be parochial in our assessments. We are going to be universal in our approaches, right?
And then that's fine. And I actually get the point that from an American vantage point, having India in the BRICS or the Global South for that matter, or the SEO has advantages for us.
The Global South, I'm going to come to the Global South. I don't think the Americans get Global South. Americans do Global South quite badly. And I'll tell you why. Because it's not the American mistake. It is the way that Global South has been labeled or imagined in foreign policy parlance. It's a reductive term.
Yes.
When you wanted to say that they are miserable and they are illiterate and they have no food and they have no water and they have war and conflict and that's Global South. Global South had been reduced to a caricature of
it's gone through iteration.
Correct. But I think that still remains the most popular imagination in the streets. I'm not talking about the thinkers and the policymakers. I'm talking about the streets. So when you say he's from a Global South country, no one is going to say he's from a country which has more digital payments than your city will ever have. No one thinks about that. They think about lack of sanitation. The images that are associated with being Global South are reductive, are wrong. So Global South. Let me just try and very quickly. India is, and Indian government has of course its own assessments and might do things. But as someone who sits outside, for me, India engaging with the Global South is not ethical engagement. It's not a moral engagement, nor is it an engagement that is only steeped in the history of solidarity, the post-colonial world of the last century. I think it is a strategic decision. These countries are rising faster than most. These countries are going to take sides. They're going to choose the pathways that they want for the future. They are going to, it is not the Global South that will shape the future. It is not the North. It is how the southern countries as they rise go either east or west. They will make decisions. Do they want the Chinese style of future? Do they want the 1945 future? What is the future that they choose? How they make choices in the next 10 years will decide the real complexities of East versus West and liberal versus non-liberal and authoritarian versus plural. Those decisions are going to be decided by the 100 odd countries that rise over the next decade and decide what they feel comfortable with. So India's engagement with them is a very forward-looking strategic engagement. We don't want to be caught by surprise and have countries of the Global South on the corner of those who are trying to reshape our borders. So it is an imperative, and I guess I'm slightly optimistic that the US is beginning to get this. That it will need to work with India and sometimes partner with India if it really wants to engage with certain nuances with the Global South. By itself, it just says, I gave you $30 billion last year. That's not the conversation you have with the Global South.
So the Global South makes sense, SEOs make sense, BRICS makes sense. So then how are we to understand at the same time being in the Quad or being increasingly part of these multilaterals and other arrangements? Because that has implications too. If you're a friend in the room if India is a friend in the room on these other groupings, are you a constraint or a leash in Quad and other multilaterals amongst allies and partners?
No, I think we are.
Or are you? How do we understand that role?
Look, we had a meeting yesterday. I think it was yesterday, the NATO meeting, right? Vilnius. Now, was America a constraint in the room, or was it an enabler in the room?
Depends on the issue.
For example, I would argue that we had this big disappointing statement by Zelensky on not being admitted into NATO. Now, do you think that decision would have happened with America or without America? I'm just asking the question. So I think countries with size, countries with a global footprint, countries which are implicated by what happens around the world, take realist, sensible positions. And India is that. India brings reality back into conversations and does not allow the margins of either side of the political debate strain the fabric of internationalism. Internationalism requires a degree of gravitas and moderation. And I think India is a sensible voice in the room. Quad, let me tell you the biggest benefits of Quad, which I don't think people get it. Can you imagine an AUKUS arrangement happening, or a nuclear tech transfer taking place in the Indian Ocean region without a Quad already being in place? India would have been on your case. ASEAN would have been on your case. The East Asian would have been on your case. Yeah, that deal would have been dead on arrival. That deal has gone through, and that tech transfer is possible because Quad gives it a cover of respectability. That yes, India supports us, Japan supports us, Australia supports. The ASEAN says also because India is there, we are fine with it. So you have moderated some of the most crucial, difficult partnership outcomes through the presence of a buffer mechanism. And I think Quad serves the purpose of allowing America to do its crazy things in our region because it partners with us, and allowing India to do the crazy thing it does because it partners with the US. So our position on Russia, our position on the current conflict it would have been very different had the Quad not existed. Quad gives India the room to maneuver to take a position on Russia that it would have found very difficult to had it not been in this intimate grouping called the Quad. So Quad benefits India, Quad benefits the US, Quad benefits. These are flexibility mechanisms. These are modern day friends with benefit relationships. These are, I call them in one of my articles, the limited liability partnerships, where we work for common purpose and common outcomes, and we don't carry the emotional baggage with us back home. So we have come here to do X, Y, and Z. We do X, Y, and Z. Then we can do 1, 2, and 3 with someone else.
Though I must say, with or without Quad, and all of that may be true what you said, my assessment is it's pretty high demand signal for the United States in the region. I mean, there's a very strong demand signal to keep us in. And if the Quad or AUKUS keeps us in, I think it's quite acceptable to much of the region.
Correct.
It makes it easier to represent.
No, again, if you look at the region, it's a very interesting question. America had assiduously built the Asia-Pacific architecture post 1945. Put together certain treaties and alliances, certain partnerships, corporate activities, business headquarters. It was a political economy of a new Pacific that had emerged in the previous century, right? Now, because of the rise of China, that geography is compromised. The purity of that geography has been compromised. Let me be honest here. Now, America has to undo its own project. So, if you now start thinking about it, it has to dismantle some of its own ambitions in that region and recast them for a 21st century reality. So the Asia-Pacific becomes the Indo-Pacific, right? The political map changes dramatically in terms of who the actors are, who are the key agents, who are the key drivers, who are the threats and opportunities, etc. So if you look at that region, there is renewed American vigor in that region because it had to recast its role, and it had to, as I think President Obama once said, leading from behind. I think that was during his.
Not sure.
But one of the. I think it was probably Obama because he was the only one who could say things like this without meaning it. So you had to change the vocabulary and grammar of your engagement. You have to bring in other folks like us to make yourself more palatable to people in that region without forcing them to choose sides. So, we were again the wire medium because, India does not choose sides, so we are happy with Quad. Quad is not a non-threatening because India is. Quad without India was an extension of the alliance framework.
Alliance.
And that would have caused a certain bit of a pushback. So we were also your moderation wing. So we do exactly what we are meant to do in schools. You want us there to be able to moderate your extremities, and we do that.
Fair enough. I'm conscious of time. I want to give the audience, we've got a terrific set of folks here to have a chance to ask you questions. It wouldn't be appropriate to do an event in Washington without sort of bringing up the China work.
Okay.
And so tell us a little bit about your current thinking on China and India's foreign policy. India is doing all of this management of these multiple relationships, multilateralism, global systems, individual relationships. How does China fit into this calculus, given the need for a multipolar system in which China is going to be at least one pole? May or may not be the strongest pole in a decade, but it's going to be around. India has articulated, one of the few things India has recurrently and persistently articulated is it seeks a multipolar world. There are not many things that are consistent in Indian declarations of the world it wants to see, but one is multipolar. Mm-hmm. And whatever you think is going to comprise that multipolar in 5 years, 10, 15, 20, 50, China arguably is going to be one. So how should India deal with that, given its other equities, given its state visit to Washington, its, as you say, movement with the EU, its role in these different organizations? And what's the ceiling and floor of the India-China relationship?
Look, I don't think in Delhi anyone disputes the fact or is not cognizant of the fact that China is going to be one of the most important actors. The biggest pole. China is going to have a significant role in the days ahead. It already does. I don't think anyone has to wait for China's emergence. China has emerged. It is now, we are describing what exists rather than predicting what is going to happen. So China is a pole. The problem is not China being a pole. The problem is that China is okay with the multipolar world, is not okay with the multipolar Asia. So the Chinese proposition is different. That it's okay with the US and a couple of others being significant global powers having influence and arrangements to manage their interests. The Chinese don't see any role for any other power in Asia. Mm-hmm. So it wants a unipolar Asia in a multipolar world. And that is where the conflict between India and China truly resides.
And maybe Japan.
And Japan as well. The Chinese challenge for India, therefore, is to do a few things. First, it is undeniable that our economic progress, the US as well, by the way, the Japanese too, many other countries, have a deep Chinese component. So, be it trade, be it raw materials, be it components, be it rare earth and refined outputs, whether it's our digital agenda, whether it's our green agenda, whether it's our industrial agenda, you will have to have a significant economic relationship with China. So the first is, how do you have an economic relationship with China, which is fair and which is de-risked from the weaponization of it by the Chinese. Right? That's the first point. So we all have to start thinking cleverly about de-risking and diversifying and all the words we hear out of DC these days. Those are real words. We all have to find ways of securing our economic lines in case things go south with China.
Absolutely.
Even though we all realize that we have to deepen our economic ties with China. So that is the paradox we need to deal with. How do we deepen the relationship and de-risk it at the same time? And that is what defines the economic approach to China. That's one point.
And I think that's what Treasury Secretary Yellen's visit is kind of showcases this attempt to manage this risk and resilience.
Correct. Although she didn't have to bow down 3 times. But yes, I think that may have been the intention. Now, that's one part. Now, one way of playing a strong economic hand with China, and we have seen this through the Chinese model itself, how China dealt with the US, for example, would be to create political and security muscles for yourself. So, if I want a beneficial economic engagement with China, I have to build the capabilities, military and security capabilities that make Chinese adventurism costly for them. So, area denial of a new variety on the Himalayas, in the Indian Ocean, is what India needs to invest into, so that we could do exactly to China what China did to the US. That making the free movement of American crafts and ships and vessels difficult. America has to announce it is now moving. Earlier it used to be its own boat. If you send its boat in its own pond, it's changed. So over the next 10 years or so, we will have to build security and political muscles to be able to keep them off from seeking to be adventurous on our border. That's the second part. But the third part is that the Chinese also have a global impact. And there are new geographies that are emerging which are crucial to us. For example, Africa. Crucial to India's future, both in terms of food, trade, raw materials, energy. Name it, and we are joined at the hips. We are going to grow together. We are going to be rising together. So we are 1 billion plus people, geographies that are going to be growing at a similar rate. So China has huge influence. So similarly, Latin America. You want rare earth, you want certain other key inputs, and the Chinese are all over that part. It's by America, it's from China. You go to and do a simple, he's my friend from Argentina sitting there, he will tell you, all their lithium mines would have some hint of Chinese ownership somewhere. Sure. So, that's the reality there. Now, so the third thing India needs to think about, because of this reality, is that how does it punch above its weight? We are only $3.5 billion versus $18 billion. I just mentioned that. So we are only 1/6 or 1/5 the Chinese size in terms of our GDP. But how do we remain engaged with these new geographies that are vital for us 5 years, 7 years, 8 years from now? So we also have to preserve key geographies for the future. And there we need partnerships and work with the US or work with the EU or work with Japan or work with like-minded countries and be able to put together propositions that are able to allow us space to have significant, meaningful engagements with them. So for China, for us, China is how do we have a sensible economic relationship? How do we create political muscles? And how do we compete with them in certain key geographies so that by the time we get to 5, 6, 7, 10 trillion dollars, they've not lost them already, right? So we already have to start playing in those new arenas that are emerging on geography. But principally, I see the limit. I see limits to the relationship. I see limits to the relationship because I think the Chinese have lost a whole generation of India by what happened in 2020. A whole generation of India, which is if you look at the under 25s and the 500, 600 million under 25s, they've lost a whole generation. And it will take a while before that can be repaired. So today, the approach to China is, there used to be trust but verify. Today, the thing is, even if you verify, don't trust. And it starts from that space. So it requires a lot of effort to move it beyond transactional, tactical trade. The core sectors, the key areas of the digital economy are all going to be off balance for the longest time. And the Chinese have no move to relent. I think they have reached the conclusion that India is a material for their current project, right?
And you brought that up, so I just do want to end on this question because I know issues I specifically left off the US and a couple of other questions, Russia and other things, neighborhood policy, because I think we'll get to those in the Q&A. I want to end on one question I'm trying to understand. What should we understand here about, if there is a consensus or near consensus in India, what China wants India to be or not to be? You mentioned it doesn't want a multipolar Asia, a hierarchical Chinese-led East Asian order. Fine. But historically, India has not been relevant to that hierarchical East Asian order. So is the consensus in Delhi that as long as India is kept out of any role in East Asia, that's sufficient? Or is it more ambitious than that? India cannot be allowed to emerge as a whole. What is the spectrum of thinking about?
I think that old lazy thinking in India that don't look at East Asia and China will not look at South Asia has been destroyed a decade ago. South Asia is today the Chinese playing ground. They are all over South Asia. I think any romantic notion that we could have, certain regions of influence where the Chinese would respect, that has been destroyed by the Chinese. So the Chinese are not interested in giving us space. They are interested in being in every space, managing all spaces. The consensus in India is that you will have to develop muscularity to keep the Chinese at bay and keep them honest and rational actors.
And which is more important, which muscle? If it's bicep or tricep? Is it economic or military? Which should be a priority for India to deal with China?
And again, I think let's take a leaf out of the Chinese book. At $5 trillion, I'll have a defense budget of 100. At 10 trillion, I'll have a defense budget of 200. So I think as my GDP grows, my capacity to deploy more resources on the muscles increases. So I think growth first has to be an agenda. And therefore, even at a time when we had 200,000 troops or thereabouts, facing off a similar number from the other side on the Himalayas, we still managed to grow our trade. Because we are not going to shoot ourselves in the foot. We need to keep growing the economy, to keep building the capabilities to keep the Chinese at bay. Sorry, that was like a poem, but sorry. So we need to do that.
Thank you. So our new board member from the East-West Center. I'm going to try to take as many as possible. I might
write them down.
Group them together, so maybe get prepared. So let me start off via rightist. Let me start with Nirmal, Nilanthi, and Young. Please just introduce yourself when you have a chance. Nirmal first.
Thanks. I'm Nirmal Ghosh.
Speak loudly so the microphone for the live stream can capture,
Okay.
and I'll repeat your question.
Nirmal Ghosh from the Bureau Chief of the Straits Times here, and also an alumnus, by the way, of the EWC. We hear a lot of rosy things about India's demographic advantage. Biggest population, youngest population, and so forth. How do you account for the fact that the women's participation in the labor force has actually fallen quite significantly in the last decade? Something like 31% in 2000 to 23% in 2021. By some metrics, by every metric, even lower last year. I mean, it's quite significant. How is India going to progress with this anomaly, internal anomaly? Could you I'd love your insights on that.
Nilanthi, why don't you answer?
Nilanthi, East-West Center. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the trajectory of India's domestic defense industry. Clearly, it's getting a lot of assists now from partners, but what do you foresee? A time when it's not going to need those assists from partners, or a time when it's really going to seek out more of a multipolar approach?
And Ms.
My name is Anupama. I am a visiting fellow with the Stimson Center. So I just had a brief question on the semiconductor thing.
Please.
On Foxconn, what are your views when considering Foxconn has withdrawn from India? How do we reconcile with that?
Let me take those three, let Samir have a chance, and then I'll turn
So,
to be a leftist.
On demographic advantage or rather the demographic challenge, the hurdle of women participation in the workforce or other women-led growth, I am not familiar with these trends that you mentioned, but I do know that Dr. Shamika Ravi has written on this issue. She has written a piece and we should look it up. She's actually discussed the findings of the studies and what are the underlying trends driving those findings. I am not someone who focuses on this area, but let me just respond by two thoughts. Number one, there is absolutely no doubt in the minds of leadership that women-led growth and women-led development and women entrepreneurship are the ways forward. So from every national scheme that could encourage women participation and onboarding women in key economic activities to around the digital sector to loans and inclusion, financial inclusion programs, you've seen efforts by leaders recognizing that this is something that needs to be responded to. Clearly, this is not something that is hunky-dory. It is something that is both a development opportunity as well as a challenge, and it requires instruments and tools. My quick take is that what has started in the last few years by bringing on special schemes, mudra schemes for women and for women startups and women cottage programs, rural programs, rural business models, will take a generation. It's not going to change in 5 years. It's not going to change in 7 years. But you will see in the next, suddenly in 2030, you will see them bear fruit. You will see numbers change. You will see women emerge. But it is not going to happen through something without deep social tier 3. So what we call the tier 3 of governance participation. It has to be far deeper than just announcement of big policies as a center. And this is a space we must watch out for. I am not someone who is competent to dive deeper into this. But that this is a challenge and an opportunity is something that is apparent to everyone who is working on India's demographic. The other demographic reality that no one talks about is that even as we think of ourselves as a young nation, we have a burgeoning over 60 population. And over the next 10 to 15 years, we'll have more old people than EU. and Europe, and they had 200 years to prepare for them. We don't have the same time frame. So we also have to start thinking about the aging part of our workforce in the middle of the century and thereafter. So I think that's the second challenge. And therefore, let me go back to my opening remarks. I think the next 15 to 20 years are crucial. This is an important window for us. Many things that are favorable and positive today may not remain so by the middle of the 21st century. And that's why I'm sorry I could not give you more on your special gender question, but Dr. Shamika Ravi has written on this. I know that because I have seen that paper. Not read it, but I know that paper is out. Domestic reforms or defense industries. Look, I don't think it's going to be an exclusive internal looking industry. In fact, all cues point to the fact that India wants to be part of the global value chains around the defense sector. From Lockheed Martin producing stuff in India for their F-35s to Tata's joining to GE engines. So I don't see that you are going to have a pure indigenous homegrown defense industry. India is going to do well, and India should target becoming part of these important defense value chains that will serve it well. I don't think any single country today, and by the way, neither the US nor any other European giant produces everything for itself. They are going to be integrated value chains, and India would do well, would be lucky, and would actually benefit if they become part of some of these. Even getting entry into these is not a given. It's not as if anyone is waiting or inviting India to come and join those value chains. So we will have to be really smart and offer something really significant to the partners if we want to be part of those value chains. But the other aspect that you have to also watch as you study this particular aspect is that India is also now becoming a defense exporter. And you saw you were talking about Jaishankar and Prime Minister Modi everywhere, but also Rajnath Singh is everywhere.
Sure.
So even he's being everywhere in ASEAN countries, from Philippines to I think Malaysia more recently.
Sure.
So, Vietnam. So you are seeing India as a defense supplier, and the minute India cracks some of those deals, it becomes automatically an interesting partner for the established defense industrial complex, even in the Western world, and it becomes a more credible partner for the supply chains. So I think this is and by the way, I also read a news story yesterday that there's a boat that is landed in Chennai for repairs under the master repair agreement that has just been signed between the US and India. So you will see becoming a repairs hub and logistics hub and maintenance hub. So interesting stuff is happening. India should not even think about going indigenous on this. It should be thinking about interlinking with global value chains. On the last part, Foxconn, I don't know what it means, but I do know what it means is that project is not happening. If you look at the Foxconn announcement, it does not withdraw from India, it has withdrawn from the project. And the minister's statement thereafter suggests that it was that particular project that is not going ahead, not Foxconn's participation in India. That's what I understood. But it happened yesterday when I was on the road. I have not really spoken to him. That's my limited knowledge of it.
Let's turn to this side. So let me start here in the front row. Let me start with a friend from Sri Lanka, and let me start over here and I'll come back to you. Please.
Thank you, Samir, for the wide and thorough presentation, deep presentation that was food for thought. But I want to go back to the
Just introduce yourself. So
I'm Gonçalo Paz from Georgetown University, born in Argentina.
Thank you.
But my question is about the topic of governance that was mentioned before. So this year has been very intensive about the multilateral aspect. A lot of change going on at the same time. So I have a three-pronged question. The first is the future of G20 that you are engaged in this year in India with the summit in September. The second is about the possibilities of expansion of BRICS, which is India's position in this, and a trade with members, which is the future about this. And the third question is also about the future. President Biden mentioned this year that it's open for the deep reform of the Security Council, and this has been, although it's an old structure of the post-Second World War, it's an issue that has been always important for India as objective of foreign policy. I would like to have your take on this future aspect.
Great question. Hassan?
Thank you, sir.
Hi.
Asanga from IMF technical advisor. My question is about India's immediate neighbor. India was the first country to assist Sri Lanka with close to 4 billion. Sri Lanka was in distress. So right now you have Pakistan, for a BFF program, 3 billion, Bangladesh, 3.3 billion. So you have a kind of a immediate periphery in distress, significant amount of debt, and unsustainable project. Has there been a shift in India's foreign policy, neighborhood first foreign policy, with this debt distress as well as?
Okay, we'll take the last question. Please.
Thank you, sir. Raghuveer Goyal, I'm a journalist in Washington from India Globe and Asia Today. I witnessed the Prime Minister Modi's visit to the White House. First time, and he was given a hero's bath. First, China was avoiding US meeting and greetings, but when they found out Prime Minister Modi is coming to the White House, it would be a very big give and take between the two countries. Finally, they, of course, Secretary of State was there. My question is here, China was watching from top to bottom about Prime Minister Modi's visit and all the agreements between the two countries, especially defense and economic and others. Where do we stand as far as this triangle is concerned, India, China, and US? Because what President Biden is saying that, and Secretary of State, and of course all the US officials, that China is competition for America. The same thing for India. So China is trying its best that India should not come up in any way beyond China's growth. So where do we stand about this Prime Minister Modi's visit to the White House? It was a very big deal around the globe.
Thank you. So you've got 3 questions.
Great. So on the G20 and its future, look, we are lucky in the world today that the G20 is being presided by a series of developing countries. And perhaps they are the only rational actors in the group. So you had Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa. You have 4 developing countries. This is the most contentious period in current times where the world is sharply divided over Russia. I mean, I want to flip it. If you had a European country as a chair of the G20 in these times, you don't have a G20 anymore. So we are first lucky that we have, coincidentally, sensible nations who are going to be taking this process forward and perhaps will ensure that the G20 survives to fight another day. I think at this time we have to make sure that we continue to develop and strengthen the habit of talking in this group, talking about things that matter, even though we can't see eye to eye on some crucial questions, especially our European friends. And
who follows India in the G20? Who's the next?
Brazil.
Brazil.
So we're very lucky that we have a series of countries who are now going to make sure that this process does not collapse. But if you had a bunch of European countries at this stage trying to run this particular group, I'm sure we would have seen the end of it. We would have been having a prayer meeting on G20. But let's be honest here, tough times. And certainly the next year or so will tell us on the efficacy and the usefulness of a group like this. I suspect if we see the trends that we have witnessed in the last few years, we might have smaller groups, G11 and G12 and some other breakout groups for some other purposes. You're going to have fit for purpose groupings working on different things. I think the AI alliance on democracy of 11 or 12 countries could be one of the indicators of where things might be moving. Right? So G20 is going through tough times. Good news that we have sensible people steering the ship, and we might still get to the other side. On BRICS expansion, I don't know the Indian view. I don't have a ear in the discussions, but my view, not a bad idea. But I think we need to understand the implications of the issue. Are we including bad debt into the group? Are we including albatross around our neck? What is the contribution that the new member brings? Is it symbolism or is it simply substance? When we moved from BRIC to BRICS, we did the symbolism effective. We brought the emerging country, developing country to the mix, much smaller than the rest. Do we want to proceed down that path, or do we now want to add some heft? So if it should be a Saudi or a UAE or a country with a large sovereign fund, bring them in and use muscles? Should it be a country with large populations and development and climate implications for the future? So I think there are questions we need to answer before we start talking about expansion. Is it likely to happen? Again, I can say that 3 out of 5 are very keen that it happens. There are 2 rational voices still in the room. I'm sure there will be some expansion at some point. Your guess is as good as mine. You could see. You would not bet against, right? On the Security Council, enduring saga, first time you have a process where you need a consensus before you begin negotiations. So that is what basically the current state of the UN Security Council process is, that you can't even put out a draft document because you want a consensus before you can put out a draft document. So first time you need a consensus before negotiations. And I don't know what the purpose of negotiation thereafter would be. So
If you have the consensus.
if you have the consensus, right? So it's a completely flawed process, which I have said in one of my previous interventions, continues the colonial project, where literally the brunt, the burden of the war was borne by the colonies, and the privileges of peace were shared amongst the allies and their victors and their allies and all those colonial masters of the past. So I think it is an eyesore. It is an unethical, immoral body, and I'm not surprised that it is defunct and useless today. Unless it reforms, you will continue to see mushrooming of other groupings that will try to do what the UN should have done. So UN is in serious trouble unless it reforms significantly. On China, US, India triangle, sir, I agree with everything you have said. I could not find the question there. But you are right that China is watching us. You are also right that China has certain assessments of where India should be allowed to grow to, etc. But I think let's be very clear here that the US-China relationship is not as monolithic as you make it out to be. I think the US wakes up every morning and decides what they want to do, China, how they want to behave with China on that particular day, and sometimes it's different. So, if you are sitting in New Delhi, you see these different noises coming out from key US leaders on consecutive days. So, I know there is a harsh and tough side of US-China relationship, but I also see an increasingly conciliatory and sometimes softer approach to China in more recent times. So, I think it ebbs and flows. And we should make our decisions on China by our own selves. Our China policy should be our policy, not based on their relationship with the US. End of the day, when we had 200,000 troops on the border, all of them were Indians who were standing there, and our China challenge will be met by India. And therefore, our assessments of China have to be dispassionate and not colored by how they are with others around them.
Let me. I just want to get in other people. Our speaker, Samir, informs me that he has a few more minutes, so I do want to take a chance. So let me start with the hands I saw earlier. I saw Vivanshu, young lady behind him, and then this gentleman, and then one. I promised you. Sorry. Yeah. So, gentleman on the end, and you, and then I'll come back to you if I have time. Vivanshu.
Vivanshu, American University. My question relates to India as an everywhere power, and how it conceptualizes its role in its neighborhood. And case in point here is Burma. A lot has happened last 2 years, and it seems like India has totally shut down its doors. It just doesn't want to do like any proactive engagement towards improving conditions in Burma. On the other hand, it seems like it's engaging with the officials, the military officials, the junta regime. So, is this the what's called survival should have to become role conceptualization, or is something different?
Thanks, Vivanshu. Yes, please.
Yes, hi. My name is Ankita, graduate fellow at McLarty Associates. My question is, our conversation around today was centered around India everywhere, all at once, and India is also flexing its muscle for the past decade or so. But if we look at absolute numbers, you mentioned India stands at $3.5 trillion today, where China was in 2007. But even if we continue to grow at 6 or 7%, by the time we reach $5 trillion, China would, our difference with China would increase, would widen by like $22 trillion, which today stands at 14. With the US, it today stands at around 21, it will go up to 29, 30. So as the difference increases, do you think that a 6-7% growth rate that you mentioned would be enough? Or should India's approach be more, it should be more measured and instead of thumping its chest and talking about India as the next power?
It's okay. And then I'll just, I'm sorry to take this, the last round. So, yes, please.
Yeah, hi, Akshob, USISPF, and just want to combine a few
Could you just
things.
give us that acronym in,
The US-India Strategic Partnership Forum.
Thank you.
And grateful for Samir for the visiting fellowship at Awara. I just want to combine a few themes here, not so much Foxconn, but manufacturing, of course. India obviously went from agrarian to services, skipping manufacturing, which of course made China this manufacturing behemoth. And as China moves more to a purchasing power model, that we've seen that the manufacturing gap has been picked up by Thailand, Vietnam, and other countries. With Apple recently opening and semiconductor now being the new oil fields, what can India do now in critical tech manufacturing to bridge that deficit with China and go from the 3 trillion to 5 trillion to 10 trillion and then the next decade, particularly high-end manufacturing?
Thank you. Please, sir.
So my name is Gopi Krishna. I'm a PhD candidate in Virginia Tech. So unlike the US, we do not have a foreign policy document which is published annually. Also, the fact that PM doesn't give press conferences, our foreign minister thankfully speaks a lot, so that balances out. My question is, would you say that India is still non-aligned or non-aligned forever? How would we describe India's foreign policy doctrine? We speak a lot about New Delhi consensus as India is everywhere. Is it multi-aligned, all aligned? India's economic focus is understandable, but how does it gel with US binary of autocracy versus democracy? And finally, how much is a morality key focus in a foreign policy, which is prudent, but also moral at the same time? Are we still a third world voice?
Tough questions to end. Okay.
No, but all good questions.
All great questions.
Look, I don't think Burma and India's rather tactical engagement with Burma is either Vasudeva Kutumbakam or not. It is part of that. It is neither a manifestation of it nor a detraction from it. It is exactly part of that, that we have to live in a world that exists around us and we cannot tailor it to our needs as we would like them to be. We have been dealt cards and we have been dealt the neighborhood we live in, right? So in that sense, and I'll come to your point, I think I missed Assam's point on the neighborhood, so I'll try to add it to this. So our neighborhood is shaped by three big impulses, Indian impulses, our response to them or our engagement with them. History, because we have a partition and we have a subcontinent that was divided. So clearly there are legacy questions there on many sides. Between 3 or 4 of our neighbors, and our relationship with them is implicated by history. The second is their implications on our domestic realities. So in the Northeast, we have to see what does it mean to one of the northeastern states. So when you are bordering Burma, what does it do to our Manipur, or what does it do to some other states? Four states, right? You implicate 4 of them now, right? So you start thinking about this. So there is an implication. So the neighborhood and its implications on our internal arrangements is the second important. And the third, of course, is our security concerns, that our broader geopolitical and national security objectives, how are they strengthened, served, or catered to by the relationships we build? Role of Bangladesh, role of Nepal, role of course, we lost Afghanistan very early on as a neighbor in our journey as a nation. But in the Western front as well, that what happened in Pakistan has an implication, what happened in Kashmir has an implication for this. So the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, right? So there are questions we need to ask. The fourth driver that should have been the most important one does not exist. Typically, you would see that the fourth driver should have been economic linkages, and that you see is the missing link in the neighborhood, right? So and in most other regions, you would find the economic driver has been equally important to everything else that I have listed before. So that is the missing, right? So what do we try to do? So because we don't have that trade economic integration where we have dependencies built through pipelines or through infrastructure and railways and roadways, etc., etc., India's role becomes more of a development partner. Now, in some cases, it is also the partner that gives room to the regimes that may not be approved by Western nations or others. We give them a buffer. We also give them a protection in a sense. Like, for example, I'm surprised at the vehemence and the vitriol in US against the Sheikh Hasina government in Bangladesh. It's crazy the way they're going after the Bangladeshi government today. Literally, I mean, if you had a magic switch and you could do regime change, you would have done it. And then you would have got the extremists in power there. So, I mean, I don't know what is defining, but, India has to sometimes make sure that it moderates these impulses that emanate from, self-certified do-gooders in certain parts of the world. So, we also have to play that role as partners of a country, right? So, I think in Burma, it is a mix of security, internal affairs, and the credibility of our longer-term partnership with what emerges in Burma. If we were to abandon them today and take a side that certain actors in the world want us to do. So we have to balance that out because they are our neighbors. They don't border California. They border India. And we have to take those calls based on the proximity. Geography matters, right? You see in Ukraine, right? Europe is all excited because geography matters. You have the same conflict, similar deaths in Africa who borders, right? So proximity matters, and that is why we will have a different take to what you might have said in DC. On the neighborhood as development partners, Asanga, we have three opportunities here. One, of course, is that as our GDP grows, we will have greater capacity to assist financially. And therefore, that $4.1 billion assistance, even before the world had woken up to the tragedy that was unfolding, as a part of that. And you will see India do more of that in the days ahead as it grows. I think we were always generous when we were a rather poor economy, and I believe we are going to continue to be generous. I've seen this across governments. It's a multi-party consensus that we will do more for the region, and I see us becoming a very significant development actor in the region, which will bring a new ethic to the aid donor-donee relationship of the previous century. So I think that's going to be one thing that we can do. The second is that we are, of course, lobbying for them very hard. So as you know, Sri Lanka, there was an impasse. The Paris Club and the Chinese were not in agreement on how to move forward with the debt write-offs and haircuts, basically. So India played a significant role in that as well. So we were the interlocutors who were trying to move the process forward so that Sri Lanka could get relief. Pakistan has not asked us for that help, so I'm not sure that we have responded. But Pakistan has friends in other parts of the world who are working on that, on similar arrangements, and they have also now got a bailout more recently. But India will play that role in the region, and when people do need it, I think people are forgetting that when you had that terrible floods in Pakistan or the earthquake in the early 2000s and late 2000s, there was a lot of assistance in helping. Even Turkey, for example, was not necessarily our best friend on 6 days of the week. We were the first responders, or we were part of the early response post the disaster. So India is going to play a bigger development partnership role, financial assistance role in the days ahead. But it is not going to sit down and tell them to change their economic policies. So that is going to be, don't expect India to do what DC does to Delhi. Change your telecom policy, change your semiconductor policy, India is not going to do that. Not yet, at least for the next few decades. So let me come to Ankita's point. Look, chest thumping is never good. The difference between Xi Jinping and Deng Xiaoping is just exactly this. He said, hide and bite. And I think we have to learn that. Hide and bite also. Turn of the century, we were a few $100 billion, and less than $1 trillion, basically, if you look at the turn of the century. We are at 3 now. We are going to be 5x or 7x in the next 15, 20, 25 years anyways, right? So we have to be patient. We have to be modest. We have to have complete focus on the simple things we need to do today. Connect the water pipelines, connect the roads, build the electricity grids. We have to do the simple things right. Don't worry about the longer horizon. But look, the Americans and the Indians don't know how to do this. That's why we have Hollywood and Bollywood, which are the most influential drama industries. Right? We like drama, we like showbiz, we like song and dance, we like to showcase and exaggerate and amplify and self-criticize and do everything that plural crazy societies do. So don't be surprised that India does this or America does this. We are people. We're just like that, right? So we will exaggerate all sorts of emotions, ambitions, failures, successes. We like drama, right? So don't expect the country to be different just because it is now on a certain path, right? So, but you are right. I think we have to. We should not be in a celebratory mood. This is the time to roll up our sleeves and work hard as a country. If that is something anyone is listening to. On high-end manufacturing, look, Ashok, there is nothing new I can tell you. You've written about all of this. What are the three things the success of any business needs? Regulatory certainty, right? So first of all, are we going to offer regulatory certainty? So someone who invests in India knows the tax rates won't change, the conditions will not change, what has been offered on day 0 does not change on day 50. So we need a certainty, predictability, right? Now certainty has two elements in India. In a federal system like US or India, certainty has two elements. One is certainty from the national government, the union government, and the other is through the local government. And sometimes, because of our own democratic cycles, we see waffling on this particular issue. So one of my ideas is that we need state champions. So if you want high-end semiconductor, rather than fight between states, we should identify 3 or 4 states who we should identify as the semiconductor zones or areas. No, because industrial policy would actually have a national footprint. Here we need like we have companies who become champions. We should have state governments who also become champions, right? So the South Koreans use the model of corporations. We should use the model of regions. That we have a auto region, we have a semiconductor region, we have a telephone region, we have a refining region. So we should actually think about how do we catalyze state champions to emerge who can ensure this certainty around investments, private investments and international investments come into play. Second, I think we are struggling in one big area. We keep celebrating a young force, and you mentioned that in your question. Is the young force capable? Are we giving them the right inputs to compete in the 4th IR or the 5th IR? And I can say that yes, we have the good raw material, but I don't think we have the refineries to make that raw material into an asset. So I think we also have to invest in education, skilling, and upskilling and reskilling of 500 million or nearly 3/4 of a billion young people.
Particularly primary.
Yes, primary, secondary, but also tertiary.
Yeah.
So I think we need a whole skills value chain that needs to be developed across the country, preparing them for these opportunities in the high-tech and high-end and high-end services as well, by the way, but also for the world. We have the advantage that we can be serving the world. Gopi, are we the third world? Are we the voice of the third world or are we the third?
Are we the voice?
Yeah.
So I ask you because Prime Minister Modi says we are a leading power, not a balancing power. So my question leads to that.
Look, you have a number of questions. It is like we should have a seminar just on your question.
Yeah.
but look.
I was a former journalist, so.
I know. I could record and you were reading from a phone, so I also knew that that's the old style. That's the old format of preparing and asking. Now look, my answer to you is very quickly. Are we non-aligned? Yes, but not in the same way that we were in the 20th century. In the 20th century, it was defensive non-alignment. This time, sometimes it is speculative non-alignment, that I will do what I want to do. It is that non-alignment, which is different. There we were seeking agency, here we are exercising agency. So what has changed in the last 70 years of our non-alignment is that was the way to get space for us. Today we are exercising the space that we are able to traverse. So there's a big difference. There's a big difference of agency and opportunity. Today our non-alignment is, as Shashi says, multi-alignment, or someone else says strategic alignment. You have these various terms. But today it is today that alignment is far more purposeful and purpose-driven. So we know why we are doing, why we are investing into certain relationships and for what purpose, and we have the ability to make it happen. And therefore, if you can play with the Russians and the Americans in the same day, for example, at the Rysina dialogue, you had Lavrov and Anthony Blinken speaking from the same stage. It is not non-alignment. It is the fact that we have an aligned relationship with the Russians on a certain aspect and an alignment with America on a wider set of questions. It was alignment and multi-alignment at play there rather than non-alignment. So we are not. So I think it's changed from the early days. Are we the third world? Again, third world is a pejorative. It is a reductive play. And typically we should not celebrate someone identifying as third world. Especially in a country, in a city which is so woke. We should not use these. Everything is cancelled. We should cancel these terms as well. I mean, the point here is that can we claim to be the voice of the third world, and we have to be very careful if we want to be that. That's my 2 points. So, do we have the claim to be the voice of the third world, or as circumstances change, you lose the ability to whom you speak for? So that's one thing you need to start thinking
And
about.
there's a historical example again of just doing that and losing it.
Right? So I mean, that's one part. And second, why are we doing it? And I think that is equally. Someone mentioned the word morality, and that was you, right? So, is a moral argument a complete argument in real politics or in the world of today? And how do we get morality infused within more decisive arguments? Right? And I think that is what perhaps India's role should be. That how do we take an ethical, moral, historic partnership with those who attained their independence with us and those who were emerging with us in the 20th century, and place it in a 21st century grammar that leads to better economic outcomes for them, that gives them more political agency, and that leads to development pathways that benefit them. So, just beating our chest on morality is an incomplete task that India must think of. But couching it, or rather framing it in a manner that leads to certain political, economic, and social outcomes that benefit all of us, must be the responsibility that India should take upon. And I can tell you 3 things. Our development agenda, India's development experience already, for example, I mean, it could be the DB direct benefit transfers, it could be the national ID project, it could be the payments, the bank accounts, the financial inclusion projects. All of these are open source and available to everyone who wants to use it. We have not built an intellectual property gate around it. These were public goods for us, and these are public goods for everyone. So the digital public infrastructure idea in the G20, we have a website that tracks the number of countries who are using India Stack framework for their own system. 12 plus countries already and counting, and large number of people signing up. So I think those are the things we could be sharing. Similarly, around being able to reduce the cost of LED lamps, low cost solar, low cost wind. The Chinese and the Americans and the Europeans might be discovering the innovation and the manufacturing capabilities to produce it, but we bring down price points like no one else in the world. Price comes and dies in India. Seriously. So that is also an innovation that we should be able to share. How do we use our manufacturing bulk to be able to create for smaller islands solutions that are reasonable. So that's the second thing that we can really share. And finally, I think we have to find ways of bringing our states into play. We need to, we have to federalize our international engagement. That we have to get some of these key states who have really good stories to share and make them, for example, I was in Shillong a few days ago, and Meghalaya has biodiversity policies, and they are giving cash transfers for protecting trees. Now, for example, you take that and you go to Barbados, they have far more conversations in common and realities that they share than India and Barbados. So I think India has to use the power of its, it's a tool for us. It's actually a force multiplier, that we can actually have geographies that relate with other countries and can we create conversations amongst them to use the full might of what India possesses. Its natural diversity is going to be something that we should be thinking about, and that benefits the third world, as you call them, or the emerging countries as I call them, emerging economies as we should refer to them, as their most important partners. So that is the kind of relationships we must form, even as we continue to benefit from our deep relationship with California and other big economic hubs. But that's the future.
Thank you, Samir. You've been extraordinarily generous in your time, in your expertise, and so much. We've covered so much ground. I'm not obviously going to even try or want to summarize it, but I can end this seminar by saying 2 things. One, for the East-West Center India, and the region of South Asia in the context of the entire India. So it's really emerging as a very critical country that we want to engage with. We already have a lot of alumni in the region from journalism programs, education programs, research programs, exchange programs, and we want to build on. And the second is I can really thank the East West Center and the board for bringing Dr. Samir Saran. I think there are a few people who have the scope of expertise, the experience, but also the standing in India to provide East West Center guidance and ideas to expand its role not only there, but in concert with our work across the Indo-Pacific region. So I'm very grateful to you, Samir, for taking this on, and we welcome you wholeheartedly. Really look forward to our October board meeting to having you with us in Hawaii. And to all of you, thank you so much for taking the time. I know in this town everything is busy nowadays with the current environment. People are reticent sometimes to show up in person. It's more comfortable in your pajamas at home. Thank you for putting on clothes and coming to